episode of the Best Book Club. I'm your host, Nu Fatora, and this is the podcast where I discuss the best stories with the best minds in the community. On this episode, I'll be discussing The Heist by Pony Pony X9. With me, as always, I have Hans Gutherson. Thank you for joining me.
So glad to be back. Thank you.
Of course. So, just as this story is a very short read, this summary it
Mm.
will be a very short one. A thief attempts to steal the crown that determines the leadership of the nation, and she rapidly learns how easily the tables can turn. There's it,
Yeah, that sums it up. That sums it up. It's so
yeah,
short.
basically.
It feels like this might be one of our shortest episodes to chat about a story in some ways, but yeah, it's kind of funny when you talk about and he emphasizes this in the story that it has such importance in determining who's in power, and it's like that seems a little foolish for a governmental system to be determined by one single piece of property and who owns it, but it is the basis of the story we're talking
Yeah,
about today in some ways.
right.
What is property was belongs, and how important is being able to take that,
Mhm.
whether it's a thing or it's someone's life. Spoiler alert,
Right.
as we
And
learn
and
the story evolves into.
and I wonder how much of it is they legitimately have power versus um it's a symbol, right? The person
Yeah,
has symbolic power.
yeah,
Uh,
I think we can assume that's correct. It's the symbol of authority. It's what is it? Because I know authority relies on a few different factors. You need legitimacy to have authority, and one of the ways you have it is through like charisma, or
mhm,
yeah, these symbols. So if people say power was given to them by something, or they possess some special item,
mhm.
it would definitely help, and I think cement some power. So it's interesting that the heist isn't just like, oh, I'm stealing a crown for money. It's like the great implications of what that would mean for the world here.
Mhm. Yes.
And we'll probably chat a bit about this, but it feels like that's the case with this story, that there's a lot that's hinted at and implied to be part of something much bigger. Unfortunately, we don't get to see any of that yet, but it certainly
Yeah.
feels like there's a lot there.
Yeah, and the bringing up the world. I think after having really gone through once again all these stories on Lucky Fetish, it seems to be that Nicely Done is the master of indirect detail, and Pony Pony X9 is the master of world building.
Mm. Yeah, I probably agree. They've done some wonderful stuff. We'll talk about this story and the world they create here in some detail. They have very nice descriptions of the environments, which I was really impressed by reading over it. Just how the hall looks, and even giving us some nice details on what the area looks like, the mountains and the deserts. They obviously, it seems, looking at some of their other stories, have a preoccupation with deserts, which is kind of interesting. We don't see that a lot.
Yep.
But certainly in some of their other stories, like Star Strider, which I really enjoy, and others, there is a clear world set up, both physically and also groups that inhabit it, and
Mhm.
people who are a part of it, and they spend a lot of time giving us information like that, which is kind of rare, especially, and it makes sense for the work they do, because most of their stories are fantasy focused, and in fantasy, obviously, world building is key. It's up there
Yeah,
with like magic, or these fantastical elements like thieves sneaking around and lock picking, and these very like D&D fantastical sort of tropes that he captures really well in this story.
absolutely. I honestly think world building is more important than the ones you and the other things that you listed because there's so many fantastical worlds that have been created by so many people that if you're not focusing on world building to a good extent to make it feel real and even more importantly different than any other you could very easily get passed over. Um,
Totally. Yeah, and that's probably why we're talking about this story. Beyond the fact it has like a surprising number of views for one so short, and just in general for a story that has like barely any comments at all, it definitely drew some interest.
mhm,
Uh, and but I think it's the world building that really sets it apart in a lot of
absolutely.
ways. Like that, he puts so much emphasis on it that we don't even know the protagonist's name. We don't even get
Yeah.
that. We don't get the countess's name. She's just the countess. The only name we get is this like helper turned antagonist, Avrin, which was a very interesting choice to give us
Yeah.
just that. So
Yeah.
obviously the world is taking center stage in this beginning parts of the story, at least as they're setting it up.
Yeah, and not providing names for two of the only characters actually shown in the story.
Yes.
I think one, it shows where Pony's priorities were at initially, like this
Mm,
story, what he felt needed to be established first, and also I kind of wonder. It kind of seems to be that the names really aren't that important in this world as of yet.
mm.
It's who it's who the person is rather than how, I guess, how they're known, if you will.
Yeah, that's a fine and an interesting insight, definitely, I think. Obviously, yeah, we get to learn about them through their actions. And the Countess, we get descriptions of her physically, same as our protagonist with the classic and familiar looking in the mirror approach to character description, where a
I
character looks in a mirror and they see them, then we get their description. The only twist on that here is they're looking in like a puddle of water, but the same effect. We get that certainly, but yeah, we are not, I guess, going into this with like a their name is, and that's not, I guess, coloring our perspective or our thoughts on them in any ways. Um, and I guess leaves us to focus on them as their actions and grab kind of names they're given. Like the Countess calls her infiltrator, or Pony X9 calls her like gagged girl at one point, and so we kind of latch onto those descriptors.
Mhm.
Um, and what I like, and I hadn't thought of this until you sort of brought it up, is like as a thief, her name would probably be kind of secret. She
Mhm.
probably would be kind of hidden from sight and notice and be kind of one of those in the shadows people. So perhaps even we as the readers aren't yet able to know who she is because of that, and kind of playing into this whole heist element, maybe
Absolutely.
in
Yeah.
some ways.
Yeah. Pony seems to be focused on visuals
Yeah.
entirely. And there was a I guess I'll do this for, and then I'll say that thing for the other thing that you brought up. But it was first posted on January 17th, 2015, and it has over 14,000 views on Lucky Fetish. Uh, Pony is on DA as 48 Carat, but they've only posted Star Strider. So it's a fun little Lucky Fetish exclusive. Um,
Mm,
but with
true.
the checking yourself out, it's the trope of the female protagonist checking themselves out in a reflective surface is I'm so infinitely grateful we've moved away from it for the most part. It still comes up from time to time somehow. Um, but it's so annoying to stop the story so you can get the character description out of the way in just like a block. That's
Yeah.
it. And that when you can easily weave little characteristics here and there into the story when they become part of the action and they're actually relevant to the story.
Mm. Yeah, it's funny that like we get like with the Countess, pretty detailed description of what she looks like, even pointing out how her skin is a certain color, but it's not all the way, and it's kind of like super specific coloring. But we don't get her name, and you're kind of like, why can't we have that if you're giving us all this other stuff? And I mean this idea of yeah, describing a character by having them look at themselves. It's certainly not just a wedgie fish literature trope. I think that's very common in uh, just like fiction in general, especially young adult sort of fiction, where that's just the common way of doing it. It's like, how do I want to describe the character? How do I do it? Well, let me have them look at themselves because that feels a bit more creative than just writing X was 6'2" blonde or whatever. So it becomes the next like best thing, but when that's the case, it becomes so cliche, and it jumped out at me because I was like, wow, this is not it does sort of take you out of it where you're like, why
Mhm.
in the middle of a heist is she taking this time to stare at herself so intensely?
Yeah.
Like in my mind, in the middle of a heist, like you gotta be moving. Like so when she's like even in the room, looking around, stealing stuff, I'm like, nah, you're here for the crown. And I was
Mhm.
into it. I was like, get in there, get the crown, get out. It was
Yeah.
intense. It was a very good
Mhm.
scene. I
Yeah.
was just like, you don't have time to be looking at yourself
Mhm.
in the
Yeah,
water. You just don't.
that's a great point. It makes even less sense for that block of description to happen in this story because of what's going on. But,
Yeah, it's a very
it's
intense heist.
it's this correct me if I'm wrong. I can't think of another story that we discussed on this podcast that has actually had that trope in it.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we've avoided it. And a lot of the ones we've seen have done the sort of super common, like, I look like this, and they don't have to look in a mirror to sort of give it to us. That sort of second step,
Yeah.
that one step removed from here's exactly what I look like to
Mhm.
here's a slightly creative, but unfortunately now cliche way of telling you who I am and what I look like and things.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not hard to find, but I feel like, yeah, the ones we've talked about, it hasn't, at least it hasn't jumped out at us as something like, yeah, that was, we can see this pattern in some of the stories.
Yeah. Yeah. I we'll run into them. We'll run into it more probably in the
Certainly.
future, but,
Oh,
it's
certainly. Yeah. Once, now that we're looking for it, it'll be one of those cases. We'll see it everywhere. Oh, wow, these characters looking in reflective surfaces to and describing themselves.
I mean, it's something that I always pick up on because it was
Totally.
so many stories were like that, but,
Yeah.
I'm Pony, it really is one of the unsung legends of the writing community, especially from Lucky Fetish. He made
Mm-hmm.
the wildly creative interactive game Arena
Yep.
and writing epic high fantasies that sadly hadn't been finished, but
Yep.
have ridiculous levels of detail and world building, of which the heist is no
Mm-hmm.
exception. And really,
Yep.
even the first line is so well done. The sands
Yeah.
swirled beneath her feet, creating a cacophony of color that contrasted sharply against the cloudless night sky. I'm not sure if I would have used that as the opening line, but man, what a well written sentence. Just the
Yeah.
visuals on display. Like, what the fuck?
It certainly feels out of place for a wedgie story or wedgie fish fiction. It's like, what? Sands beneath feet and clouds night sky? What? Where's the high school setting?
Yeah,
Where's
really.
the nerds and the bullies running through the halls or whatever, It's very quickly he sets up, as he does in his other stories, like, this is not your traditional wedgie story. This is going to be fantastical from the very beginnings. It's going to be other than what you're used to and what is most common in the community. We certainly see magic in stories in any number of genres, including the classic bully nerd dynamics and things like that. But full blown fantasy worlds are much rarer,
Mhm.
especially ones that are set in like a desert plain, for example, and in these sort of interesting castles. We'll get very often, especially in more recent years, with stuff like I think it was Sleep Olive today, and even Magni Pulls more recently. You'll have these fantasy stories that are very D&D esque, where characters are going through the woods and they'll have some adventures there, but setting in a desert, setting it against this backdrop of stone mountains. It's very different. It's very interesting. Like this isolated place, not a huge big city center which is also kind of common in fantasy in general. If we think about even stuff like Castlevania and these massive cities and things, it's very interesting how they set this up, and they feel like they've put a lot of detail and attention into creating a pretty unique setting.
For sure. Now, this I had to change my thought on this because something with it changed recently. Is I feel almost as sad by the length of this story as I did for feeling the fire until it burns.
Mm.
Though, as we've found out in the last little bit of that Nicely Done has decided to continue the story, so that sadness can go away now. But there's only 2 chapters for the heist, and
Yeah.
as we've detailed, it has insane world building. It just makes me want more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's impressive how much they're able to pack in. You get, when we think about it as a heist story, you get so many of the elements of a classic heist. You get a little bit of the setup. You realize she's on a job and what that job is, and she has some details mapped out and a plan for getting in. She has an interesting break in with this secret entrance and has to deal with the guards and get past them. We see her being clever and quick and sneaky and a good sort of face, so to speak, someone who can talk past the other workers and make her way in and identify traps. And she even almost escapes, which is really
Hmm.
interesting. So we get all these cool elements of a heist. And we get all that in 2 very brief chapters. And obviously, spoiler alert for those who haven't read it, she gets captured. She gets stuck in this wedgie, which they kind of foreshadow. We foreshadows interestingly in the beginning with this dungeon that's clearly some kind of wedgie dungeon and prison. And so you take all that, and you also have some really just solid writing, very
Yeah,
clean.
absolutely.
Also lines I really like. It's that thing we've chatted about before, where they'll have long paragraphs, but then sort of punch you with something very brief.
Hmm.
Like right before she gets caught, there's a long description about sneaking out. So I'm like, gonna sneak away as calmly as possible, but not calmly enough. And that's when they get caught. It kind of it brings you back into it, and
Hmm.
it keeps you really engaged. It's all these techniques of really good writing, and it's like
Yeah.
I wish you'd kept going, like especially how it ends, right? Where it's like you set up this plot, you set up the story. She almost steals the crown, and it's like now you have a brand new goal, and you have to do what feels like a second heist, which I love. It's like you're going to kill Avrin. It's like, whoa, it totally changes everything we had in mind. This Avrin character we know nothing about, but we sort of are just like, all right, he set up the job, he wants the crown. We're kind of on his side. At least I was when I'm reading it in the beginning. Like, I don't like this countess. Countess sounds like evil. Whenever a name is like a countess, you know they're bad. Only thing more bad is like baroness or something like that. All those like evil sounding names.
Yeah.
But now we instantly have this shift. It's like, how could you write that and set it up so interesting, but put the expectations on our head and not like instantly come out with a bunch more chapters? It's
Yeah.
heartbreaking.
Yeah. One small thing that I'm glad uh, the heist doesn't do for as a I guess a mainstay or a trope or whatever you
Yeah.
call it in heist stories is that it's not the one last job thing. That's so overdone.
Yes.
So I'm glad
It's
it's
true.
she's
Yeah.
basically in the middle of her career or whatever. So
Yeah. Yeah, it must be because there's this really interesting line in the story where Pony X9 notes that she's what was the word, professionally qualified or something. I'll find the exact wording, and it really jumped out at me. I'm like, oh, so in this world, oh, professionally sanctioned
mm,
thief is what her title is, and so in this world, you need to be professionally sanctioned. So there's some sort of body that oversees thievery, and so I thought that was very interesting
that kind of
how you set up even that tiny little detail of
Yeah.
like, wow, so not everybody can just be a thief, or maybe you can be, but obviously there's going to be higher class of thieves,
Yeah.
some people who are like more renowned and you go to for work, and so she's one of them. She's probably
Mhm.
proved herself and gone through some training and things. So that was a lot of cool detail
Yeah,
in
definitely.
that. Plus, like everything from her outfit to how she carries herself, it's well done in helping give us a picture of her without being like, I've been doing this for X number of years and I did this heist one time, and like none of that stuff,
Yeah.
which was creative. There's a
Yeah.
lot of tropes we don't get, which is cool. We don't get the putting a team together. We don't get um, sort of talking through the plan ahead of time and seeing it
and
go
and
perfectly.
have
And then
that.
obviously when it actually happens, it falls apart at every step of the way. We don't have that, which I like. Um, so it's still a very well executed heist in a lot of ways. I would have loved her to be more sure that the crown is where it is. All she has is Arvin's letter of like, and he even says in the letter like the crown should be there or something like that. And I read that, I'm like, yo, I'm not doing a heist on a should be in the room. Like I'm not. I would have to case that. I'll have to know it's in there for sure. I need to know where it is. So she even gets in the room and she's like, "Where's the crown?" It's like, no, you don't have time for this. You're gonna get caught. So that was kind of interesting too, because I mean, it's not super cased out. A maid's outfit was kind of fun and funny touch. Uh, and the fact like she doesn't get a wedgie until like the second part after she's captured was kind of fun and interesting too. Because I could have seen it even when she's getting past the guard or she has to get it at some other point, even when she trips the tripwire. I thought when I first read that that's what was happening, that she was getting a wedgie and she was getting hung up, and then I reread it, I'm like, oh, she's getting, her legs are getting caught in that classic trap, she's getting hung upside down or whatever. I was like, oh, it would have been fun if it was a wedgie, but it's not in your face like that. It's not over the top wedgies everywhere. It's more subtle. It's like you don't see someone hanging by their underwear in the beginning, and she's just sort of hanging it by the end. But you don't have the countess like talking about it, like saying why she's like doing this or anything like that. And you just have the thief kind of thinking about it. It's like, wow, how painful it is. So it's kind of interesting the treatment of the wedgie there. It's a bit more complex and nuanced in some ways.
Mhm. Yeah, the professionally sanctioned makes me think of privateers versus pirates. That
Mm,
distinction
I like
back in
that.
the 1700s, I believe it was. Um, it's like maybe there was some inspiration there from a period of history. So
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's probably where some of this stuff around symbols of power coming from. I would imagine some of that was historically influenced, potentially, or just a love of fantasy and how obviously objects can have so much power in the world of fantasy stories. Obviously,
yeah.
especially they're like magical items, and that doesn't seem to be Pony Pony X9's big focus, but we do see a great interest in these fantastical sort of elements of like assassins and thieves. I mean, they wrote a story called The Notary and the Assassin, and they did like a treasure hunt kind of story. So very like fantasy oriented and interested, which I really love
Mhm.
about them, because we don't get a lot of writers who are like clearly have these focuses and that they play into so much. I think
Yeah.
beyond obviously the high school nerds and the bullies and those sort of very familiar tropes,
Yeah.
it's less common to say, oh yeah, and here's someone who loves fantasy and who writes a lot of fantasy stories.
Mhm.
Very fun to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess I've described a few stories as cinematic in the past, but
Mm,
really this one takes the cake of all the ones that we've talked about so far.
I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there isn't a single moment that I'm not perfectly picturing everything that's happening.
agreed. Yeah, that's a great point and a really good choice of words there. Cinematic definitely sums it up.
Mhm. And as you were getting into just there, is legit fantasy has really only taken a hold in this community in the last few years. So Pony was way ahead of his time.
Yeah, I think so. I think from the earliest days, we see the crazy magical fantasy of magic schools, probably partly inspired by like the Harry Potter craze
Mm,
and things. And we get stuff like Wedgie Academy where magic kind of comes in, but it's kind of tangential and it's kind of like this device for wedgies, and it's not super like explored or thought out. It's just like telekinesis for wedgies in some ways, or things like that are super common. So yeah, digging into like deeper fantasy of like what does a world look like, what is the government like, things like that we never really get for obvious reasons, including the fact like we've talked about this a lot, but how much detail thought are you going to put into a story that's ultimately about like wedgies and turning
mhm,
people on? And for most writers the answer is I just want to get to the wedgies, and I may give you some detail about the world and the characters, but often that's not the focus or the interest. Um, and only, yeah, in some more recent years, I think Magnipulse did it with a series a bit ago. Curse of Calzone, Chino, I think was the one
okay.
I'm thinking of. And that had some world building, mostly just setting up how that was. There was like a great wedgie war in the past in this fantasy land, and things like that. So certainly, it feels like in a lot of ways, Pony Pony X9 was ahead of his time and ahead of the times of some trends like interactivity. He was a big part of bringing that to the community.
Hmm.
Was ahead of the game on that, in very significant ways.
For sure. Yeah, the little I don't know. I guess I don't really have an actual thought there. Like the very beginning of one, but whatever. Um, Something else is still really cool to see today is proper punctuation usage. It was becoming
Yeah.
the norm in 2015, but it is still so refreshing to see someone use semicolons and other marks correctly because it is still
Mm.
a pretty big problem today with so many writers.
Yeah, it's just so clean. Like it's a
Yeah,
really clean story, super well written and creative. And you wish like if only this were the standard for all the stories.
yeah,
Obviously
really.
never gonna happen. Can't
Oh, maybe,
standardize how
maybe.
it goes. Because we're always gonna get, even if everybody's writing stuff really good, we're gonna get some writer who's brand new, who's gonna be writing something random, and you're like, oh man, you forgot about colons and punctuation and commas, or they're gonna be like English as a second language, and
Right.
there's no problem with that, obviously. Uh, Even if you might be like, oh man, I wish this were like it was cleaner to read or whatever. It's like it's great to see more content coming out. It's just gonna be tough because there's always gonna be those instances where it's like, why can't you have edited it more? And I'm guilty of that too, as you know. Somebody who could have been editing more and would have cleaned it up and made stories better, but it's like it's too scary and too much work. So
Mhm.
number of reasons why unfortunately we don't get everything as good looking as we do the heist.
Yeah, but I mean, it's. I don't think anything has ever. Um, I guess with the exception of writing about wedgies, I don't think anything has really taken the writing community in full. I mean, it's you're always going to have exceptions to people doing uh, the main thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, even writing about wedgies on Lucky Fish forums, right? Remember that meme post of someone just posting weird fox balloon pictures? It's
yeah.
like it's a fictional story section of a wedgie board, and there's not. They just post pictures of foxes and balloons. It's like we're being trolled.
Hmm.
So obviously you're gonna get very bizarre stuff, and we
Yep.
can joke about it, we can laugh about it, and we can make posts as people did there, just be like, "This is the best content ever," you know.
Hmm.
You have a bit of a laugh at it, and that's fun, especially when the board's healthy, and it's a sign like you can you have stuff going on there, and it's kind of thriving enough so that you have weird stuff coming on that you don't need or want, but you have it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we get nothing at all on the board. It's like I'll take that period where we had weird stuff too. Just give me something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the update just makes it so aggravating. So
Yeah,
it's just not worth it anymore.
yeah.
I'm
Game breaking in game speak
yeah,
terms.
yeah. It's what killed it. But
Yeah.
um, I'm a little torn on the lack of dialogue. I think it
Mm,
suits this story extremely well because of the premise and because so much of the time is taken up with world building. So I don't really have
yeah.
a problem there. Yet I wish there was just a touch more of it.
Sure.
Don't know how you would do it.
Yeah. That's a good question and good interesting point. I mean, it's tough because there's so few characters. We get a tiny bit of just description between an exchange with the sort of maid who points her in the right direction, and we get mostly her inner dialogue thinking about how she isn't planning on getting caught and things, uh and sort of mostly world building. So you're right. I mean, it would be great if the story kept going and we got to, I imagine it would have to become, with a lot of the world building out of the way, so to speak, more dialogue focused, more people talking and interacting. Because like this whole plan of killing Avranch, probably have to figure out how to do it. Would the Countess become an ally, and would we learn about her? Like, would she not be this villainous character? And that's something they you could explore through dialogue potentially, as we realize there's reasons for her wanting to keep her power beyond just being power hungry, which might be the only reason, something like that, or she might have a more noble reason, which would be interesting to see. And maybe Avrin really is this big bad, for whatever reason, which would be cool.
Yeah.
And who the character is, like, do they have other thief friends who they could work with, things like that. And a lot of that I imagine would have to get explored through some dialogue as they go through the world, no longer a prisoner with this new goal in mind. So it might be another case of, like, if the story had gone longer, we'd get everything we wanted.
Yep.
Sometimes is what we come up against on these episodes, it feels like.
Yeah, it's the annoying cop out that we kind of are forced into is
Mm,
who knows what would have happened if it had continued. It's just
yeah,
ah, but the one
yeah.
we can check one story off that list now with feeling the fire until it burns. Thank
Yeah,
God. So
as long as it gets finished. If we
yes.
never get another part, and then we'll be like, but what would have happened with Davy?
Well,
Yeah.
I guess we'll
Well,
just
but you're certainly right.
I guess you and I
Yeah.
will just have to keep up our praise and talking about it. So it keeps going. But yeah,
Exactly.
maybe uh, uh, I guess for people listening, if there's a story that you just absolutely love that you want to see continued, you have to give the feedback. You have to show that people are interested. Otherwise, it's so easy to get burnt out or just lose interest in what you're writing.
Yeah. And I imagine that was probably the case with Pony Pony X9. I mean, the heist has 2 comments on it and none on the second chapter. So as a writer, that's definitely gonna have to burn you out. And seeing like 14K views is great if you're me, but for him, he may have been like, I want the comments, I need the feedback. And when you don't get it on a story, it's probably like, okay, let me move on to something else.
Yeah, yeah. You just y- the audience clearly isn't showing that they're interested
Yeah.
beyond just looking at it, and all it takes is just clicking on the thing real quick, and then he exit
Yeah.
out. Um,
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, like for all he knows as a writer, as all we know as sort of readers, is like people read that first part that we really liked and we thought was a really interesting world building, and they're totally lost. They're like, I'm not gonna read this. Like, where's the wedgies? Like, they don't get to anything until near the end of the first chapter, when there's these hints about wedgies, but nothing visible or nothing seen. So if you're a
Yeah.
reader, you might be like, okay, let me go with something where where's wedgies much sooner, and they're more detailed, and they're happening right away.
Hmm.
And you don't get that with the heist.
No.
So that could be part of the reason. Uh, or it might also be the case of like there was a lot of love for it, but people just don't comment.
Yeah.
Just sad, and you're like, oh, please.
And I feel like maybe even just a small portion of it is also that there was so much there were so many other things being posted on Lucky Fetish at the same time, so it could
True.
have been just overlooked or buried beneath everything else.
Totally. That's a great point. I imagine that was part of it. And they may have been Pony X9 interested in other projects. I mean, they had done the community story before this,
Mhm.
and after this, they were on to some other stories later in the year, like Ghost Gold and Wedgies, an exploration tale they wrote later in 2015. So perhaps they were just gripped by other stories they wanted to write. They were also writing like parts of the second community story and things like that. So uh, it may have just been an interest in these other trailblazing efforts that they had in mind in terms of writing with others and interactivity and things.
Yeah, definitely. When when I look at it and I kinda step back for a minute, it actually feels a little rushed. I
Mm,
could see multiple times where the story could have been expanded to have more detail, like when the unnamed thief is picking a lock. Showing some
yeah,
of the tension of picking a lock more complex than she's used to would have been amazing. Like maybe she
sure.
hears some footsteps and has to pause and hold her breath or something.
I like that. Yeah, I like all that. Yeah, I guess the thing with the story is I guess it's all set up for this other plot. It's like the heist doesn't really matter. We don't get a lot of detail. Like, when did she get this job from Avrin? Obviously, we don't know who Avrin is yet. None of that stuff. Nothing like, oh, Robin from a countess, and who exactly this countess is in terms of the greater world. We don't get a lot of that. It really all feels like setup for going after Avrin and that kind of surprise reveal. Um, Obviously, you could argue it doesn't hit as hard as it could because we don't know anything about Avrin. He's not a character that we're like trusting already or we have some deep connection to. So when the Countess is like, you have to kill him, we're not like, no, not Avrin. No, I just saw this stuff with him and now I'm so attached to him. Don't kill Avrin. Like, we don't have that. We're just like, whoa, what's the deal? Like, who's
Mhm.
Avrin, yo? And so we're kind of waiting for more
Yeah.
generally. So it could have been an interesting approach to write the story in such a way where the heist is built up a lot more. We get some of that stuff around planning it more, maybe somehow getting it from Avrin, and maybe her going back and forth on something so high profile as robbing from a countess. Like, has she done huge jobs like this before? Did she think about not doing it for whatever reason? Because it would be pretty dangerous, probably a lot of security. Even if she has like this kind of party, she can kind of like go in with and be that distraction. It's like she probably expected some traps, but like that's some hardcore security for this crown. It's clearly very significant for the realm. So all that stuff you could have set up more, but like I keep saying, I feel like it's really just like they want to get to the real story, which is Averin. So let's just get to that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Something you brought up a little bit ago that I was actually happy you did. It's because of the short length. The foreshadowing of the dungeon and trap
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really make sense to me. Like it happened too fast for there to really be room for any foreshadowing. Do you think it's deserved or makes sense to have it in there because we only have two chapters?
I think it was okay for. a wedgie story and you want to set up that there's some and something's not right here, it certainly is a little jarring because you're wondering like how common are wedgies in this world basically
Mhm.
is what I'm thinking. And we get some details but not a whole lot of depth about the world for I assume multiple reasons, including if they dumped like a Dune amount of world building on us in the beginning, we probably would have been overwhelmed as
Mhm.
readers, even if you're really into it. Like
Mhm.
if you're going into a wedgie story and you get that much kind of world building about who exactly the Countess is and all this history around the crown and what it means to steal it, it would probably be a bit overwhelming. So the wedgie foreshadowing, the sounds that she hears of stretching and things, I feel like it's like a hook for readers who are maybe on the edge about continuing to read. And it's like, don't worry, there's gonna be wedgies. Just stick with me for a bit.
Mhm.
We're gonna get to the heist. It's gonna be cool, and then there's gonna be some wedgies, and we get them. So I feel like that's one of the reasons for it.
Mhm.
I think another is to set up some aspect of how wedgies are in this world. The fact that they're not super common, they're not in everyone's dungeon, for example. It's something about this countess, probably, is what we can assume based on the thief's reaction. And she thinks it's very weird to be seeing some of this stuff. So I liked some of that a lot. But certainly it would have been cool if there was even a bit more of it, I suppose. Like, I don't know if this would have been too on the nose, but maybe the protagonist thinking about wedgies at some point earlier. That might have given too much away though, but if you're seeing underwear and just underwear sort of in a dungeon hanging up there, uh I don't know, maybe that's not your first thought, but it might have been interesting
Yeah, I
if there
mean,
was something about wedgies or like if she'd done some research into this countess. I don't know if something like that would have come up if she
mhm.
would have known that was how she punished people in some way. That
Yeah.
might have been cool.
Yeah, I'm the it jarring is a really good word for that. Is we're watching a movie and it's all these crazy visuals and then oh shit, wait, oh, there's wedgies. Okay, we're back to reality. We're back to the real world. All right, here we go. But it's worked in well enough that it's you can pretty easily just keep going and move past
I
it.
thought so, yeah.
Now, I would love to be a fly on the wall when the thief is caught by the trap, just watching her be flipped upside down. I'm really not sure why. Maybe it's some kind of voyeurism that's surfacing in me. I don't know, but
Mm.
like I would wanted to see that more than her in the wedgie.
Interesting. That was a cool detail, and I was surprised when it wasn't a wedgie, but I liked it too, and I thought it was cool. And I like how even like she's trying to escape, but we get the little detail of like the knife falling to the ground. I thought
Yeah.
that was a very nice touch. And here's some nice attention to detail. And here's a very intense like the you've dotted your I's and covered your T's, so to speak, with this. It's like we're not sitting there wondering like why did she escape or like
Yep.
you've really shown us what she has already to defend herself in some ways, and now she's lost all that.
Yeah.
So it
Chekhov's
was
gun.
pretty well handled, definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just Chekhov's gun. That's what me thinks of it. That's what it makes me think
Yeah,
of.
sure.
It's used.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
uh when so with the countess, that's the character. That's probably the entire story. That's the thing I'm most interested in
Yeah.
because there's so much potential there that I could see. There's probably so much more to her and her
Yeah.
life story than just she's a countess.
I hope so. Yeah, I really hope so. I mean, she could be the classic evil queen like character who's just all about evil and power and I guess has a wedgie fetish and takes it on people, which would be hot. But it would be really cool to see if she has some much more detailed backstory. Maybe Averin crossed her at some point, has been always trying to take power, and she has to do what she does and rule the way she does to stop him from taking over and ruling the land in worse ways than she does. Perhaps
Yeah.
that's why she's out there in the desert in her like kind of isolated castle, with so much defenses around the crown because she lives in fear of this guy or something like that. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of interesting ways you could take her character as she is in the two parts we see her. She's clearly very royal and regal, and Pony Pony X9 does a really good job setting that up through some of the descriptions, how she looks and how she acts, and very on the nose, and it's clearly through this thief's eye of identifying her as a royal, and she certainly acts like one and is seen as one through this character's eyes. But hearing like if she was born to that or if she had to fight to get into her position, things like
Mhm.
that would be really interesting.
Yeah, you sort of there's a I guess a conception or whatever, however you call it, that of when you think of royalty or uh, like kings, queens, all that kind of thing, is there's like a certain purity to them, or there's there, there's it usually is the case that there's corruption there, but I sort of automatically think, oh, it's a royal person. They have they're untainted in a way,
Mm,
and so
yeah.
having that sort of conception of the what goes along with that title, and then the a little bit of a darker side by not just she gives the thief a wedgie, but the way she does it. Like there's so much there that could potentially say so much about her character.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that like when she comes in, she doesn't make it worse. For example, she's not pulling on the underwear, which is a nice touch, for example. She just lets her hang there, and just sort of addresses her. So it's like she's not getting her hands dirty, so to speak. She's
Mhm.
not getting herself down to that level. So there's certainly this separation from the beginnings of the story all the way to the end of like this royal who is above the rest. And so robbing her is this very like Robin Hood esque thing of like I'm stealing this crown from someone who has a lot, who has a weird wedgie dungeon, and I'm gonna give it to someone else. I'm noble in my pursuits as a thief. It's sort of set up how it goes in the beginning. And then at the end, when you sort of realize like the crown decides ownership of the throne, so it's a little complicated in my mind of like, so she's not the queen, I guess. If she's the countess, I guess the crown gives her some power, but I don't think she's the ruler of everything. If there's a crown who decides ownership of the throne, like, you know what I mean? When they talk about the crown, it's kind of like who put her in charge. But if someone did, maybe there's a good reason for it. Maybe not,
You know,
but maybe there's a good reason she's
I
in charge.
yeah, and I thought of something that could be what Pony was going for, is the crown is a fake, and this whole thing, because the countess has said, she brings up how many thieves have tried to get in and break, and the
Mm-hmm.
current one is the one who got the furthest. I'm wondering if it's
Yeah.
a test for the countess to put on other people, that in
Mm.
order to find the person who can actually get at Avrin for
Yeah.
whatever he is.
I think you're right, and I was wondering that too. And I was when I was rereading it because it'd been a while. I was like, is that what this kind of is? Some kind of setup and some kind of test. Like she instantly puts her to work and says, "This is your job now."
Exactly.
So it feels like that's been a plan, not kind of sprung. She clearly hasn't like moved the crown somewhere more secure than where it is, and has dealt with many people sent by Avrin.
Yeah, absolutely. Eh, It's yeah, like all these politics, playing the games between, even if Averin is a ruling person. I mean, you have these political games that are being played that um, the common person is just caught up in, uh,
Yeah.
uh, willingly or not.
Mm-hmm. It's true. How many other people has Averin sent to try and steal it?
Hmm.
And what stories has he given them?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that, like, knowing this, the Countess is unable to do anything about it. He must be so untouchable in some ways, either so hidden or so powerful. Like, maybe he really is this very powerful force that she can't just go up against for whatever reason. Um, or she can't do anything without her concerns beyond turning to a skilled thief to try and assassinate him. And the
Hmm.
question becomes too, like, has she turned other thieves to try and kill Averin? Is it like this constant cycle
Yeah.
where the ones who do okay, she's like, now you go kill Averin. Uh, and the thing I was wondering at the end of the story too is like, how does the Countess convince our thief to actually go through with this?
Hmm.
Like, she's a thief. I don't know if that means she's also an assassin or has like any experience or interest or would be willing to do the killing. So is it just going to be a case where the Countess is going to threaten her to do it, or is she going to like release her and be like, there's also a reward if you do this, or something like that? And I'm curious, like, how you get someone to follow through on that. Because as soon as you set her loose, she could just run off and be like, I'm not going to go kill somebody. So I'm really interested in what that hook would have been and how you make that happen
Hmm.
in the story as well.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find where I'm trying to going back to the game or the story. There's a part of it where the thief talks about. It gives just like the slight uh, look into how she feels about Avrin, and so I'm wondering if it's really like there's because she feels this way, um, that probably not that hard to get her to swap sides.
That's interesting. I know early in the beginning, right after she reads the note from him, which doesn't tell us a lot about him, other than he's kind of careful, he's kind of smart. It seems clearly got some stuff figured out. Gives her the maid suit. Like, he's not an idiot. He's not like just going and steal it. He's giving her a plan. He's giving her some of the tools, expecting her to do the rest. But right after she reads this letter from him, she thinks like, did the fool think she would get caught? Calling him a fool.
Hmm.
That could be just because he assumes she's getting caught and she thinks anybody who's going to kind of look down at her or be condescending is kind of a fool or an idiot. Or maybe for some other reasons we don't know, he's not actually that smart or doesn't seem to be that smart. Based on what we learn at the end, we can maybe assume there's a lot more to him than whatever our protagonist knows, which is kind of interesting to think about too. I mean, I looked up the name Averin because it's the only name we have. So I was like,
Hmm.
what does this name mean? And interestingly, I think it's a variation of the Hebrew name Abram or Abraham, which basically means high father or exalted father, which feels kind of significant because it's again this person of status, of position. He's not given a title like the count or something like that, but the meaning behind his name obviously bestows some position of maybe power, and that's maybe deliberate. It might be coincidence, as always, if we don't have the writer here to quiz him on that. But that's something I was able to glean and was wondering, like, so maybe that's a hint that there's more to this character, that he does have this power that I've hinted at that we maybe don't know yet, but would could see in the future.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it really is just that little thing. It's like she says he's a fool. So, but yeah, there's all this world building and detail and foreshadowing. It just makes you want more.
Totally. Like, we know she has contacts who told her
Yeah.
about the secret entrance. We know, like I said, professionally sanctioned. Um, she knows that she's gonna have to be very careful on this job and stuff. So she feels seasoned. She feels like a sort of veteran. Way she carries herself doesn't feel like an amateur. So it's like I would love to see her pull off more heists.
Hmm.
It's interesting how quickly we moved through the first one. It would be wonderful if, like, in the setup to taking down Averin, there's maybe some other heists. Maybe she needs some kind of weapon. Maybe she needs to do something to draw him out in the open, whatever that might look like. And there's a couple heists that finally get us to her confronting him or something like
Hmm.
that, and a lot of wedgies along the way. That might be really cool.
Yeah, definitely. But all we can do is speculate.
Certainly, certainly.
When I got to the end, I was reminded of Legacy by Chloe on Lucky Fetish.
Mm,
Both
yeah.
stories ended prematurely, and both are super promising. And
Mm.
it's just another disappointment in the long line of dead or dropped stories in the graveyard that is Lucky Fetish.
Yeah, and it also has like a robbery, someone there to rob something.
Yeah, another
And
heist.
it's one of these rare sort of robbery heist stories on the board. There's probably only like I did do a check, and of stories that feature the word heist, there's only like seven, counting Legacy, and there's probably others that are about robberies and stuff being stolen. Probably only like about a dozen. So it's
Hmm.
not a very common genre to be explored. But for me, it has a ton of promise.
Absolutely.
Obviously, Sleep All of Today back in 2020 did that really awesome heist contest, which was really fun. RT Blackwood took second, and Rook of Spades took first, which some fun stories. So I love heist stories. I think they're great and so much potential to do fun things. Certainly, as we've hinted at, there's tropes that are so common that can be a trap, I guess, in some ways that can be just so familiar and beyond the obvious, like characters looking in like glass and see themselves. I mean the heist tropes of, like we
Right.
said, putting a team together, or the one last job, or like the character who is robbing out of necessity because they're gonna die of cancer or something and they need to
Yeah.
do this job, that sort of stuff. Thankfully, like, the community's never gone into any of that stuff, mostly because the community's been so rushed of, like, someone's doing a robbery, as we see in the heist. Like, someone's doing a robbery, something goes wrong, wedgies happen.
Yeah.
That's the basic setup we see in so many of these.
Hmm.
I mean, same in, like, Shao's done a couple. He did a story called Thief Spirit, which was written with a lot of community input. But he also wrote another one before that. And it was similar. It had some supernatural elements in it, but it's the same thing. Someone goes into a place to do a heist and sort of wedgies ensue, almost like a haunted housey, which is one of the most common tropes in the community. But so
Yeah.
it's fun to see that not they're not super uncommon. They're not the most rare thing in the community heist stories, but I'd love to see a lot more of them. And Pony X9 had a cool setup in the heist for sure.
Absolutely. So, how would you continue this story?
That's a great question. I think we hinted at that a bit. I would love to see more of the Countess's backstory, like the moment after she says you're going to kill Avram. I'd have her sort of taken down from the chain wedgie hook thing contraption she's in, and have her sort of sit down and tell her more about the world, why Avrin's got to die, things like that. Lay it out really clearly, and then probably it would eventually become another heist to get to Avrin, who's probably super secure, and it's a more elaborate heist. It might be cool to see her putting together a team and having to plan out the heist, trying to avoid the worst of the cliches, I guess, while still paying homage to them. And then in the end, gets to Avrin, and then probably killing them. There probably have to be some really good reasons for killing them, though. Like,
Yeah.
maybe he has some, like, personal connection to the thief and stuff, but I don't know how much of that's cliche, how much of that could be forced. But it'd be cool to see another heist. I would need more heists in the story, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the title's pretty on the nose, and I'd I'd want it to do more with that than just
Yeah.
have it in the beginning and then discard it like Karate Friends. Uh,
Yeah, I would hate if we never see another heist and there's just no more heists.
yeah,
Like, and it would be hard, I feel like, to not have another heist unless there's literally no moment where she's breaking into somewhere else or trying to break into somewhere to get to Avron. It'd be really sad if even that didn't happen. But it feels like you'd have to do some more heists. And I mean, even like a legacy, something like that. Like, it feels like the heist is just the setup for some wedgies to happen. It's like this perfect porny setup of like I can do what I want to you because you broke into my place,
yeah.
like
Ah,
in this very kind of perverted way,
it's
which is
great
what
though.
Legacy was all about.
It's
And it's
great.
like you can't get me in trouble, so I can have my fun with you or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so we kind of have the exact same setup here, where it's like I've captured you, I have power over you now. You have to do what I say. Um, and clearly it'd be interesting to figure out like how do you actually act on that as the countess? How do you actually make sure she goes and tries to kill this guy?
Hmm.
Do you tell her others have tried and failed and things like that, or do you not tell her that? And so there's a ton of potential. I really love the setup, and the fact that I have so many ideas, I think, is a testament to the power of the setup. Point Pony
Absolutely.
X9 left. But what do you think? Like, does something jump to mind? Some vision of how it could go?
I mean, I like what you were proposing. I'm thi- I would, if there was going to be another, if there were going to be more heists, I kind of think it would be just another, just one more, but it's a long drawn out one
Yeah,
that is a lot more involved and could, I guess, would be a heist of something that's rather than it being like a physical object or like money or something like that. Like you're stealing someone's ideals or something like a, I guess much more of
clever.
a poetic heist. That's where I would want
That's
it to go.
clever. Yeah, that's clever. I like that. I like that. It's funny because like I was just a couple days ago I watched this awesome heist movie from the 60s I think called The Hot Rock, which was
Okay.
very funny comedy that everybody should watch with Robert Redford. Yeah, 1972 heist movie. And this movie was hilarious because there's not just one or two heists. They literally have four heists in
Oh
one movie
Jesus.
to steal the same thing. And it's awesome. It's
Okay.
great because these heists are great. They're like GTA level heists that they pull off, and they don't feel rushed, which is really impressive. And the thing with ensemble stories is they often feel rushed too. It's like I wish I had more of these
Yeah.
characters. They everybody does get a chance to shine, which was really fun. So like it would be cool if you get maybe a series of heists. Like I mentioned, you have to draw Avron out. So if a heist isn't stealing him, maybe it's somehow stealing something important to him. Maybe it's even stealing someone in his family or something, to draw him out. But maybe
Yeah.
the twist is like this person that you have to steal doesn't like Avron because maybe he's a really bad guy. So the twist is like she'll help you. The daughter, say it's his daughter or something. The daughter's like, "Nah, I'll like let you like kidnap me, whatever." So you draw my father. Oh, my father's a bad guy. I want him like taken down, whatever,
Yeah.
something like that. Like there's so many ways you could take it. This idea of like stealing ideals is pretty. I love it, and I'm like I'm trying to think of how you do something like that. Like
Well,
it's almost like Inception in that way of like, do
yeah.
you break his worldview somehow? And I don't know
Yeah.
how exactly you do that,
Well,
but I'm
maybe
I'm intrigued by it.
just like how the crown symbolizes all of this power and authority, perhaps there's something of Avron's that symbolizes so much of whatever he
Yeah,
is to him.
yeah,
It's actually kind of funny when I think about it. Two of my favorite movies are basically Heist, Inception, and In Time, which is so
yeah.
underrated. Watch In Time; it's a great movie, so great.
Is that the Justin
Timberlake, yeah.
Timberlake one? Yeah, I've seen
They
that
got
one. Yeah, I
the
remember seeing that one in the theaters. That was a clever one because they play with the mechanics very smartly. It's almost like Brandon Sanderson's story where you think you understand how things work. They're like, but here's other things you probably didn't think about. And Inception, same thing. It's this super intelligent layering,
mhm,
also super smart writing, and it's just such a well done heist story too. So,
absolutely.
yeah, those are great examples.
Yeah.
And there you get a couple heists, which I love too. It's not one thing. You get a couple heists, and then they have to go through layers. It's kind of like the Hard Rock. It's kind of funny to
Yeah.
think about.
Yeah. Just they're stealing ideas. That's all.
Yeah,
That's all.
yeah,
And it kind of
which is a
it
huge differentiator.
and
Yeah, big time.
Inception sort of breaks that mold of the heist where they do a heist in the beginning and they do a couple of, but then it
Mm-hmm.
ends up being the opposite of a heist where they're trying to
Yeah,
give something to someone.
exactly right. They're giving somebody something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
While also taking something because they're taking one idea they had. You know, it's bonkers. It's really
right.
bonkers and very creative.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
creative. Plus, the main character is getting something back. So it's very deep, deep layers, which is obviously the medium like fits that message like
Mhm.
really well. And then if you see a movie like that really stupid time travel one that they did later, so dumb, it's terrible. Forget what that one is even called. It was so bad. Um, you know what I'm talking about from a couple
Looper?
years back. No, that was a good movie. Although I didn't love it as much as some people, but I did like that movie a lot. I'm thinking of the other Christopher Nolan movie.
Hmm. I'm
It'll come
curious.
to me. It'll
Yeah, I
come to
have
me.
no idea.
It was Christopher Nolan.
Let's see here.
Tenet,
Tenet.
that one. I
Ah,
like
yes.
Tenet because they
Okay.
it's kind of the same approach of like a very complicated concept, and the way the film plays out is supposed to mirror it. Is just very unenjoyable to
Hmm.
watch. I didn't
Okay.
like it. Unlike Inception, where you're like, I could rewatch that movie any day
Yeah.
and so much about it. And then you'll randomly just be thinking about it. You're just like, isn't it so clever that like the guy has to pee and it's raining in the world, and
Yeah.
like how clever all these elements are and stuff. It's just so
Yeah.
cool.
Just how they affect the next layer. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like everything really matters in
Yeah.
that, and that's kind of what we get in the heist. It feels like, sure, we could have got more detail, but it's so tricky in terms of how much world building do you do, how much detail do you get of a character, how much setup do you do for the heist, all that very complex questions to ask as a creative when your audience is wedgie fetishists who want wedgies. How much time can you spend without losing them in the first place?
Mhm.
So how do you write a story that's fun and entertaining and kind of fits into what wedgie fetishes need while still doing something creative and capturing that high spirit? And this is a very good effort at going to try and do all that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very well said. So it's been a little bit. So it's now time for the Witch Earth segment. Maybe I should come up with some kind of drop or something that I can play. But it's been a minute. So as I guess for a reminder, I'll describe them all. But when discussing realism in stories, I have a question I like to pose. Out of the four Earths I'm about to describe, which do you believe the heist falls under? And that question goes out to the audience as well. If you think if it's under a different Earth, let me know. So you have realistic Earth, where Earth is normal as we live it every day. Alternate Earth, where Earth is changed to some degree, mainly focusing on wedgies. Idealistic Earth, where Earth is changed to fit the desires of the wedgie community or some aspect of it, depending on the writer. Or fantastical Earth, where Earth is changed to be unrecognizable, like Lord of the Rings and Dungeons and Dragons. It can also be a mix of those
Mm.
four. It can change between them. It can be none at all. It could be something entirely different. But I'm curious where you fall on this.
That's a super tough question. I'm struggling with this one, so you have to help me.
Would you like me to say what I think it
Don't
is?
want to say. Yeah, you go first. Yeah.
I believe it to be pretty much fantastical Earth because
Okay.
the setting is so different than
Sure.
real life, and
Yeah,
the world building is so central to this story that it sort of that's what's driving my choice.
that makes sense. And the only reason I didn't jump on that too is because like it feels other than like the Wedgie dungeon aspect and the fact she's capturing this Wedgie. It feels like it could be like a setting, like a real life place in like the medieval times, so to
Mhm.
speak. Like the I guess that would whatever that era would be. I don't know, not a history major, like the 15, 1600s or something like that, 1700s. Time of castles and this idea of political power and crowns and monarchies and things like that. That feels like grounded enough in some reality where it's not like there's magic or dragons flying around or dwarfs and gnomes and elves fighting than
Yeah.
the Wedgie dungeon.
Well,
It feels so. I guess I'm kind of torn between idealistic because you have the Wedgie dungeon, you have these crazy elaborate traps, you have the protagonist not just getting executed for what is described as an act of treason. So I maybe idealistic is where I'm kind of
yeah.
torn, but certainly because yeah, it is a quote unquote fantasy setting. You have these very fantasy tropes of a thief and royalty and robbing from them. So I don't know, because even idealistic, you'd think the ideal is like more wedgies and like so many wedgies, but
I,
you don't get a lot of them. So I'm kind
I
of
feel
torn between
I,
the
I
two.
I feel like the way you described it would make it more so be alternate than idealistic.
Yeah,
Um,
that might be where I'm landing. I don't know.
for anybody for the folks back home, as Norm Macdonald once said, uh, fantastic, hilarious podcast that he did. The medieval era, the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, they were between 476 AD and about 1400, 1450. So,
Okay, I was
yeah.
kind of close at first, and then super off.
But that's one of my favorite time periods. But yeah,
Same.
I could definitely see what you're saying though. Like, there's really not magic brought in or anything like that, and
Hmm.
it's just regular humans as far as we've seen, but in a
Yep.
medieval fantasy setting. But I still like Fantastical Earth because it feels so fantastical to me.
It does. You're right. Yeah, that's why I'm so torn. It does feel fantastical, and like
Mhm.
if you told me this was a George R. R. Martin or a Tolkien sort of story, I'd be like, yeah, I can see it because
Yeah,
there is this detail and these worlds just being created before us. There's world being created and there's some complex systems of power and things and that you don't often see, especially in the wedgie community. So that it kind of really sets it apart and captures what we associate with fantasy. So yeah, no, I'm with you all the way.
yeah. So I guess we could call it fantastically alternate.
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. Alternately fantastic.
yeah. Alternatively fantastic.
There it
Yeah,
is. There it is.
yeah. Well, is there anything else you'd like to discuss or about the heist?
No, I don't think so. It was really nice chatting about Pony Pony X9 and this story. They are a trailblazer, I think, in a lot of ways, and kind of underrated, as a lot
For
of talents
sure.
on Lucky Fish forums are by the nature of the board and the nature of the community and its history of not really recognizing talent beyond liking their stories and things in some ways, or stealing them when they're done
Yeah,
and they leave. That's the
yeah,
one thing we get. So I was really glad we got to chat about this. Like we said,
yeah,
interactivity. They were a trailblazer in that, and in a lot of ways, very, very powerful in terms of showing you can do world building and write really creative stuff. So I'm really, it was very fun getting to chat about them.
for
Very
sure.
different from some of the
Yes,
other stories we've talked about.
yes. Very, yeah, extremely underrated. On DA, they only have 18 watchers, which is,
Yeah, it's bonkers.
yeah.
And they posted some art,
Mm-hmm.
so it's really just crazy, crazy to think about.
Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to promote?
I would go say check out some Pony Pony X9. Read their stories on LF. Let them know you love them.
Yeah.
Maybe we can bring them back into the writing as
Yes.
well. That would be
Yes.
awesome.
Check them out on DeviantArt as 48 Carat. That's
Mm,
KARAT. So,
yes. Nice.
Very, very, very much worth your time if you enjoy fantasy.
What about you? Do you have anything to promote?
Nope. figuring
Oh,
out figuring out things for different ideas for this podcast,
nice.
but no, I have something in the works, but
Ooh,
it's very,
exciting.
very early stages. So I'll let it let that just that little tease marinate while I get the rest
Nice.
worked out.
Yummy, yummy.
Well, so ends another A1 discussion with Hans Gutherson, and the first of many on Pony Pony X9 stories. Thank you so much for coming on.
Always glad to be here. Thank you.
If there is anything that you'd like to hear me discuss, or if you'd like to come on for an episode, leave a comment or send me a message on DeviantArt or Lucky Fetish as New Fatora. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode of the Best Book Club.